Today, we'll discuss the events that occurred in Italy in 2022. What happened to 26-year-old OnlyFans star Carol Maltesi made headlines and TV news. Even though Carol was the victim of a crime, some people said she was to blame for what happened to her. Carol was born on December 23, 1995, in Italy. Her father was Dutch and her mother was Italian. When Carol was a child, her parents divorced. Her father moved to the Netherlands, and Carol stayed with her mother in Italy. Being the sole breadwinner, her mother had to work a lot. Those who knew Carol well described her as a cheerful, beautiful, slightly shy young woman who loved adventure and travel. In 2015, Carol got pregnant. The pregnancy was unplanned, but Carol decided to keep the baby. In the future, she would never regret making such a decision. Carol was happy when her baby was born, but at the same time, she faced some difficulties, like many other young parents. Carol and her partner moved to Verona, where she got a job at a shoe store. Verona is a city in northern Italy that is popular with tourists. In 2019, Carol fell in love with another man with whom she began a secret relationship. Later, she confessed this to her partner, who was the father of her child, and they broke up. After that, Carol moved to Milan with her new boyfriend, and her son stayed with his father. In Milan, Carol got a job in another shoe store. She visited her son every time she had the opportunity. But soon, Carol's life and the lives of millions of other people changed. The pandemic began. Due to widespread restrictions, the store where Carol worked was closed. She needed money both to support herself and to take part in her son's life. Left without a source of income due to the pandemic, Carol started looking for new ways to make money. That's how she found out about such a platform as OnlyFans. During the pandemic, OnlyFans experienced a real boom. As people were locked in their homes, some were looking for new ways to have fun, and some were looking for a way to make money. Carol achieved some success by selling her explicit photos, and it seemed like an easy way to make money. Like many other girls, Carol began her career on OnlyFans by selling her photos. Gradually, she started making explicit videos, and eventually, this led her into the adult video industry. While working in the industry, Carol used a pseudonym, but I will tell you about this a little later. Carol lost some friends who disapproved of what she was doing. Some people condemned her, but she loved this job and considered herself an actress, no different from those who star in ordinary movies and TV series. She was just playing a role according to the script she was given. The only thing that was different was the genre. She knew she couldn't work in this industry forever. After all, the older you get, the less in demand you become. Therefore, she planned her future and thought about what she would do when she stopped doing adult movies. At the same time, Carol now had more and more problems in her personal life. The relationship with her new boyfriend gradually deteriorated as he disapproved of her new profession. He couldn't bear the thought of his beloved spending time with other men. But Carol thought it was just a job, nothing personal. Disagreeing with this opinion, her boyfriend broke up with her. At that time, Carol was living with her boyfriend's parents, and after the breakup, she had to look for a new place to live. She moved to Rescaldina, a commune that is part of the city of Milan. At the same time, she now had a new man in her life, David Fontana. He was 17 years older than Carol. David was 42 years old and worked in a bank. On social media, he gave the impression of a successful person who enjoyed life and loved cooking, experimenting with recipes every time. David was also a photographer. He had been married for many years, and everyone who knew him believed he was a happily married man. But it wasn't true. David was looking for new sensations, meeting women online to diversify his personal life. To get the women he liked interested in him, he would offer them free photo shoots, and one of those who accepted David's offer was Carol. At first, they corresponded online, and when David realized that Carol was interested in him, he asked her to meet him in person. Their first meeting took place in November 2020. But this story didn't end after that photo shoot. Their meetings became frequent, and their relationship became intimate. Fontana was married, but that didn't stop him. He seemed to have fallen in love with Carol. In the early spring of 2021, Fontana decided to break up with his wife and devote all his time to Carol. He moved into an apartment in the same residential complex where Carol lived. David helped her make adult videos, and judging by some reports in the Italian press, they managed to make good money on it. He was basically her manager. David knew he was not the only man in Carol's life and was okay with this. Carol occasionally dated other men, and this fact, along with what she did for a living, later became the reason why many people judged her and spoke of her with contempt. In the fall of 2021, Carol started dating a guy named Salvatore. He was her co-star, and their relationship seemed pretty serious. Salvatore gave Carol a ring, and she was happy, yet David was still present in Carol's life. In 2022, Carol was in great demand in her profession. At the same time, she did not stop posting videos on her OnlyFans account, but now, Carol didn't just upload her videos, but also created content that her subscribers requested for extra money. It happened as follows. Subscribers wrote to Carol and asked her to make videos in which she would do what they wanted to see. She would name a price for such videos, and after receiving payment, she would start shooting it with David's help. It should also be noted that David always received his percentage of the proceeds for helping to create content for her OnlyFans page. As I mentioned, Carol knew she couldn't work in this industry all her life, so she planned to save up more money and move to Verona to start a new life and be with her son. And Carol was close to making her plans come true. But in January 2022, she became less active on her social media. Carol almost stopped posting new content on her OnlyFans account and took a break from starring in adult films. She also stopped seeing her friends. About 2 months later, some of them started texting Carol, and the latter always responded. In those messages, Carol always said she was fine, just a little tired. One of the texts said she had taken a vacation and went to Dubai. But all this, as it soon turned out, was a thoroughly planned lie. On March 20th, 2022, a tourist walking through the picturesque places in Borno made a terrible discovery. Borno is an Italian commune in Val Camonica, province of Brescia, in Lombardy. The tourist noticed several black garbage bags. He came closer and saw a hand with long nails sticking out of one of them. He immediately called the police. The police officers who arrived at the scene had never encountered something so terrible. In total, they found 4 garbage bags with fragments of the body. The remains were in such a state that it was not immediately possible to determine whether it was a female or a male body. Later, the experts determined the victim was a woman, and that before the remains were dumped in a remote area, they were presumably stored in a freezer for some time. The investigators checked all recent reports of missing women but weren't able to link them to the remains found. The woman's face was burned, but the police hoped they would identify her because 8 of her distinctive tattoos remained intact. One of the tattoos on her ankle was the words "Step by Step," and another one on her collarbone read "Wanderlust," and down her back she wrote, "Elegance is." The authorities believed that whoever took her life was well acquainted with her, since there were no reports of the disappearance of a woman with such tattoos. The police released an image of the tattoos, hoping that someone would be able to recognize them and help them identify the victim. And the person who helped them identify the victim was Andrea Tortelli, a reporter who, after seeing the images of the victim's tattoos published by the police, began his own investigation. Tortelli helped not only to identify the victim, but also to find the person who committed this crime. He said the turning point in his investigation was a call from his friend, who said the victim's name was Charlotte Angie. Charlotte Angie was the stage name of Carol Maltese. According to Tortelli's friend, some of Angie's tattoos were identical to those that the investigators found on the victim's body. Tortelli then went through Angie's social media accounts, photo by photo, video by video, taking pictures and enlarging them. He quickly realized that the tattoos in those pictures matched those listed by the police. Tortelli searched online for people who worked with Angie, such as directors and agencies. He contacted 2 agencies, The representative of the first one said they no longer worked with Charlotte Angie and had not heard from her for a long time. Through a second agency, Tortelli found out Charlotte Angie's phone number. He also discovered that her real name was Carol Maltese. After getting Carol's phone number, Tortelli started calling her, but her phone was always off. As a last attempt, Tortelli texted her and was very surprised to get a reply. He said he was a journalist and asked if he could call her and explain everything, saying it would only take 3 minutes. But the person with whom he corresponded avoided this phone call in every possible way and replied, "I don't have time for journalists right now." However, Tortelli didn't give up. All he needed to confirm or disprove his theory was to hear Carol's voice. He replied, "The body of a woman with tattoos was found in Brescia. The police released them to identify the victim, and I think that several tattoos match yours. I know it sounds crazy saying this, but I found your number to check it out. I wanted to explain it to you and talk to you." The answer was polite but dry. "Oh, I understand. Several people have already told me about this girl. Fortunately, I'm fine." Tortelli did not back down. He texted, "If you don't want to talk on the phone, can you send me a 3-second audio message, just to make sure it's really you? To be honest, if I don't get a response, I'll contact the police so they can check everything. Some tattoos are very similar." But the person Tortelli was texting with refused to send him a 3-second audio message. At that moment, he realized it wasn't Carol and handed over all the materials he had to the police. As for the feelings he experienced while texting with someone who posed as Carol, Tortelli said, "I admit I felt fear and anxiety. Before telling them everything, I asked the police officers to confirm one detail that I hadn't quite figured out, and that was whether the tattoo on the victim's side was red. And they said it was red. I was afraid that whoever hurt Carol was a member of her family. In this case, the tragedy for those who loved her would have been even greater." The police needed to act quickly because the person who pretended to be Carol could go on the run after realizing that Tortelli had figured it all out. That's when David Fontana came to the station, reporting he had seen the pictures published by the police and that the tattoos were similar to those of his girlfriend, Carol Maltese, who had disappeared. The fact that David reported Carol missing only after her remains were found seemed strange to the investigators. When asked when he had last seen Carol, David started nervously changing his story. At first, David said the last time he saw her was in January. Then, he said it was in February. And then he voiced the third option and said he had not seen her for about 2 weeks. He was obviously hiding something. The investigators interrogated David and he eventually confessed that he had taken Carol's life. Subsequently, the police discovered the frightening details of this case. David said that on January 11th, 2 months before the remains were discovered, he and Carol were shooting another video, which was requested by one of her OnlyFans subscribers. Whoever paid for this video wanted it to be unusual. The subscriber wanted to see something extreme. David had to tie Carol up, put a bag over her head, and then hit her on the head with a hammer. It was supposed to be staged, but according to David, during the shooting, he lost control and hit her too hard. When he stopped and took the bag off Carol's head, he realized he had done something terrible. Carol was still alive, but instead of calling the emergency services, he decided to end her suffering. He went to the kitchen, took a knife, and carried out his plan. Answering the investigators' questions, he wanted to make everything look like an accident. But it was hard to believe because instead of calling for help, David went to the kitchen to get a knife. He didn't tell anyone what had happened, not a day later, not a week later, not a month later. Instead, he took Carol's phone and started impersonating her, trying to convince everyone that Carol had left the country. But the fact that he was impersonating Carol wasn't the worst thing. Carol had plans for the future that didn't include David. She planned to return to Verona to be closer to her son. Besides, she was in a relationship with Salvatore, who gave her a ring. During the investigation, it turned out that on January 11th, 2022, Carol and David prepared to shoot an extreme video requested by one of her subscribers. But that was also partly a lie. The person who asked for this extreme video was David Fontana himself. It turned out he had several accounts. He posed as another person and said he was willing to pay for an exclusive video. David thought he had come up with a great plan. Posing as Carol's fan, he made a custom video request. The important thing is that this fan wanted David to take part in the video. He described what should happen in the video, namely that David should tie her up and tape her mouth, and also described other details. What he wrote next suggests that David had planned everything in advance. Posing as a fan, David wrote to Carol that during shooting, she should tell David the password to unlock her phone and text her boyfriend Salvatore that she was going to have intimate contact with David. Carol fulfilled this condition and texted Salvatore. However, the latter knew this was part of the script. It turned out that what happened to Carol was not an accident. After all, David had come up with a plan in advance to find out the password to her phone so that he could then impersonate Carol. It was a devious plan, and David got his way. Carol thought she was making a video for her subscriber and did everything he asked. During filming, she told David her phone password, then she texted Salvatore, and after that, he put tape over her mouth and a bag over her head. Then he took a hammer and did something that could not be undone. When Carol was dead, David unlocked her phone and texted her boyfriend, Salvatore, saying that the video shoot was over. Of course, Salvatore did not suspect that the person who texted him wasn't Carol. As I said, David lived in the same complex as Carol. After taking her life, he went to his apartment, leaving Carol lying on the floor. Later, he returned, looked at everything again, and went back to his room. The next day, he went to the supermarket as he already knew what he would do next. He bought an electric saw, a hacksaw, scissors, and cleaning supplies. Then he took Carol's mobile phone and ordered a freezer online. It's not hard to figure out what he did with Carol's body after he bought all these items. At one point, he tried to get rid of the remains with fire but was unable to do so. This explained the burns on Carol's face and hands, which were found during the forensic examination. He continued to store the remains in the freezer. After that, all he needed to do was to ensure that no one would bother to look for Carol. 3 days after her death, on January 14th, Carol was supposed to go to Paris with her boyfriend, Salvatore. David took her phone and texted Salvatore that she had contracted the virus and wouldn't be able to travel with him to France. In the following weeks, many people called and texted Carol. David did not answer calls, but actively used text messages to convince everyone that Carol was okay, and he succeeded. However, David didn't just reply to messages. He also posted photos of Carol on her social media, further convincing everyone that Carol had gone to Dubai. He even paid for her apartment. Carol's boyfriend, Salvatore, often called her, but obviously no one answered those calls. David did everything to give Salvatore the impression that Carol had found another man. Eventually, Salvatore believed it and stopped calling her. David knew he could not impersonate Carol forever and that someone would find out the truth sooner or later. So in March, he decided to get rid of the body. Before that, David reported on Carol's behalf that she was tired and wanted a break from work and social media. But his plan began to fall apart when a tourist came across black garbage bags containing Carol's remains. David was shocked when Tortelli, a local reporter, started calling and texting Carol. Then he decided to go to the police and report that Carol had disappeared. The trial began in November 2022. David continued to insist that the crime was unpremeditated. He claimed he was jealous and lost control of his actions after Carol said she planned to move to Verona. Prosecutors insisted that David be sentenced to life in prison. Before announcing the verdict, the judge said, "The man understood that now, after having used him to some extent, Maltese decided to dump him, and the idea of losing the person whom he, by his own admission, loved madly, on whom he depended, since she had allowed him to overcome the substantial loneliness in which he was consumed previously, proved to be unbearable." David Fontana realized that young and uninhibited Carol used him to some extent to realize her personal and professional interests, and this triggered his homicidal reaction. Fontana was driven not by jealousy, but by the awareness of having lost the woman he loved, accompanied by a sense of growing frustration at having been used and set aside. According to reports from the Italian press, the judge was later criticized for calling Carol uninhibited. On June 12, 2023, David Fontana was sentenced to 30 years in prison, but the story didn't end there. On February 21, 2024, the Court of Appeal changed his sentence. Before the verdict, Fontana made a spontaneous statement. He said, "I would like to apologize once again to everyone for the terrible thing I did. I would like to apologize to Carol's parents. I know I may sound emotionless when I speak, but I actually feel pain inside. I remember that day and what I did, and I feel great pain. I am determined to correct my actions as much as possible. I would just like to point out that I have never been interested in money. I do not know if I will ever be able to receive forgiveness for what I have done. I would really give my life to change everything. I will spend the rest of my days trying to help others and make amends." David Fontana was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 30 years. Share your opinion in the comments, and thank you for watching this video to the end.